Hi everyone, welcome to another episode. It was an exciting day today. We got to speak with Dr. Thomas J. Fuchs. Now, who is Dr. Thomas J. Fuchs? He is the founder and chief scientist at Paige. He's also the dean of AI and human health at the School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. And he's also a professor of computational pathology there. And I'm pretty sure he created the term computational pathology. What is Paige? Paige helps pathologists diagnose cancer more accurately at much faster rates and at a lower cost by using a suite of FDA-approved AI algorithms. I think as well they're one of the very few companies in the world that actually has an approved AI algorithm working to detect cancer. Impressive stuff. Their prostate cancer work has shown to reduce diagnostic errors by 70%. And for those sensitivity and specificity nerds playing along at home, it does fantastic work in reducing the false negatives. Thomas has had an incredible career working from everything from the Mars rover all the way through to his current work in computational pathology. Honestly, you look at his resume and you go, what have I done with my life? He's such an impressive figure. Thomas is from Austria originally, but now resides in New York with his family and where Paige is centered. We had a lot of fun in this conversation. Please enjoy our first, but hopefully not last conversation with Dr. Thomas J. Fuchs. Now, Thomas, thank you once again for joining the show. You got Elliot and myself here with you today. Now, obviously your career is wide and ranging, but one thing that I came across is that you actually worked with JPL or Jet Propulsion Labs with NASA back in the day. So can you tell me, what did rockets teach you about AI and cancer, and how did you end up moving from the world of rockets to the world of cells?
So first of all, thank you, Tom and Elliot, of having me, and that's actually a very, very good starting question. So actually, I did computational pathology before even. So we started doing pathology or AI in pathology during my PhD at ETH Zurich, which was in machine learning, and started applying that in pathology and coined the term computational pathology back in the day. But during my postdoc at Caltech, I worked with JPL since I'm, of course, a space nut, and then I was very lucky and I got hired and played rocket scientist for a few years.
That's
So,
great.
um, so practically what we did is we used the same computer vision tools we used, for example, in pathologies or algorithms we trained to find cancer and segment cancer. We used on imagery from the Mars rover to, for example, differentiate different kinds of terrain, gravel from sand and so forth, so that the next Mars rover doesn't get stuck. We also used it on imagery from orbit to assess landing spots and so forth. So that was quite exciting, and it shows how nicely machine learning in the eye can be applied from a microscopic to the microscopic world. But more philosophically, right? I think it's actually quite interesting. There are different ways how you could approach rocketry and different philosophies. You see it, for example, a difference between what NASA does with the SLS system versus what, for example, Starlink does, which is more like what Wernher von Braun and so weiter did, and that is blowing up a lot quickly. And that's actually a good strategy also for machine learning, right? So philosophically, machine learning, what a lot of engineers, when they get first in touch with machine learning, don't understand that machine learning is the art of failing. It's constant failure. You try models and you fail. The models don't work and they fail. And sometimes you put in works in weeks and months and you don't have any results to show in terms of code or models or anything, but the only thing you did is you better understand the domain. So failing very fast in machine learning is absolutely an advantage, right? And in rocketry, if you can afford it, like for example with Starship, and you can blow up them quickly, then you can actually learn a lot in a very fast order, and that's quite different than engineering is usually done, where you have meticulous planning and then you build a thing once or you train a model once. And that culture clash is, of course, something that has to be handled in academia, but also in industry. I'm sure you both experienced that as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think, look, you're absolutely right. I think this ability to try things and experiment and continue to iterate really has given so much advantage to this field. Tom and I had a very brief stint in hardware before we moved things into machine learning, and making mistakes there was certainly a lot more costly than rerunning a model with a few different hyperparameters. So 100%. That's so interesting. And I suppose, on this topic of trying and getting to success, obviously Paige is doing quite well. I'd love to hear a rundown of Paige, where it is today, and how you got started, and where the spark for that idea came from, and translating that work you did, no doubt, early in your PhD through to what is now quite a great company.
Yeah, that's quite a broad question. Maybe let's start where we are today. So today, Paige is the leading SaaS company in pathology. Paige is used, the platform and its AI, across the globe, from Oxford to Brazil and everything in between. We have collaborators also in Australia, of course, and that's, of course, fabulous to see. It took, depends where you want to start, 10, 15 years, practically the company now 6, 7 years, to get to the stage where we really have AI in the hands of pathologists, and it's real. So today, if you want to have a digital pathology experience from the beginning to the end for the whole sign-out process, you can have that thanks to Paige and its partners, and you can have AI on top that's safe and effective, that has been proven to be safe and effective. But yeah, that of course was not the case always, and when we started looking at that very long time ago, again, we coined the term 15 years ago, nobody cared about machine learning or pathology. Right? Very niche fields back then, but that of course made it also interesting. We built the science around training models, training ever larger models. I was always a believer that scale is necessary. Pathology is a very empirical science. If you took your best medical students and have them learn every single pathology book, they would still be a poor pathologist, because it is very empirical. They have to look at tens of thousands of slides themselves to become good. Same thing with, of course, machines. So we started digitizing at scale, and we built a computational pathology program at Sloan Kettering, spun out Paige in 2017. I built a compute cluster in New Jersey. It's actually still the world's largest compute cluster, only dedicated to pathology. That was quite exciting. And we built ever larger models, and that allowed us to build, for example, prostate cancer detection systems that were good enough to actually pass the hurdle of the FDA. And after several years and building a large company, we could prove that it's safe and effective and works for everyone. And now it's used all across the globe. So that's very exciting. And now Paige, of course, is a large company with many dedicated teams, from data science to machine learning to cybersecurity to user success, customer success, and so forth, or to really make sure we can transform finally that last bastion of analog medicine, more or less, into a digital world.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, if you're we like to go deep into the models on this show. So if you could tell us a little bit about the models that are being used in Paige today, and also maybe where they came from within the company as well, how they came to fruition.
Of course. So a lot of the models that are currently in deployment, and also the ones that went through the FDA, are based on deep learning models, on convolutional neural networks, and they were specifically trained in a multiple instance learning scheme. As you can imagine, the classical approach to training these models, so really strongly supervised systems where you have pathologists annotate slides or really paint on them, show the algorithm where the cancer lesion is, where the no cancer lesion is, does not work in practice because there are not enough pathologists to actually annotate all the data we generated over the years. So we had to come up with something new. And what we did is we built a system based on multiple instance learning, which is a weakly supervised algorithm. You can think of it's more or less in evolution between strongly supervised learning and completely unsupervised, self-supervised learning as the current models. So it allowed us to train models directly from the pathology reports. So from these large images with millions of cells that could hold all your holiday pics, we could compare them to the pathology reports that showed you if there's cancer or not, but you didn't know where it is or how it looks like. And then if you trained that system over weeks on tens of thousands of these slides, it slowly started to figure out how actually cancer looks like. And the beauty of that system is that it really focuses on the difference between slides with cancer and without cancer. And the differences are not the normal tissue, not the mimickers of cancer. These are not folds or other differences, but the difference is truly only the cancer morphology. And so you can train them at scale. And that's how we trained most of our systems, like a prostate system, prostate detection, grading, but also our large breast system. Paige just launched a complete breast suite. So there we not only do cancer detection, segmentation, but also mitosis counting. That's something pathologists really don't like to do. And you can calculate the whole Nottingham score to actually sign out patients for breast cancer. But the world is changing, of course, which is great. And I founded Paige to really industrialize the field of computational pathology. So larger scale, larger models, taking really advantage of that wealth of information we're just scratching the surface off in these large slides. And these new wave of AI, these large unsupervised models, transformer models, help us to pre-train ever larger systems. And that's what we are doing now. And that's, of course, exciting new phase, which is more or less really an extension of what Paige is doing since its beginning.
Oh, that's really interesting. With these transformer models in particular, I'm curious to know, there's a lot of talk around how these big pre-trained foundation models, perhaps trained on general image data, may be applicable to many, many domains. And then there's some counter-argument to that around the need for really training these transformer models purely on, say, pathology in this case. Have you found one of those two works better in the use case of computational pathology?
Yeah, so first one has to decide what actually better means, and that's of course not so easy because these are intrinsically unsupervised models. So there is no measure objectively that tells you which foundation model is better than which other foundation model. The same way you don't have a objective measure that tells you what clustering solution is better than another clustering solution. So it's ultimately really an unsupervised approach. So you have then to use these models in downstream tasks, which you then can evaluate. That can be, for example, cancer detection, but can also be, for example, what we do a lot is prediction of molecular changes, so EGFR or FGFR or many others, MSI, or outcome data. So we designed a whole suite of these tasks for which we use these very large models, and then that's how we test and can judge if something is actually better than others. So what we found out over the last, we actually started doing that one and a half years ago before even the term foundation model or generative AI was coined. What we could see is if you train from scratch, if you have hundreds of thousands of slides, these models work better than any pre-trained models on ImageNet or other models. So we do train everything from scratch. That's, of course, a huge effort, takes enormous amount of compute, but the results are better.
Yeah. Very interesting. You didn't. You also just didn't have a choice back when you were starting with a lot of this. There was no foundation model to lean on. But I'm very interested in this idea of the weakly supervised models and trying to understand and trying to take advantage of all this information that you have. So a big problem that we initially came into was we were able to access large amounts of information, both in a research capacity and in a private company capacity. But the difficulty that we really came across was turning that information into something useful. Now, it sounds like you solved that as an issue for the company a number of years ago. How is that going for you today as you bring in new ideas into the company and also go into new areas? Is there still this bottleneck on turning your information from just information into high quality labeled data?
Yes, so that's a constant struggle, and that's always a struggle in healthcare in general, and especially in AI in healthcare. So that's part of the game. I have many colleagues who are exceptional computer scientists, and when they wade into healthcare, they are completely shocked. Right? Suddenly, the data is chaotic. It's confusing. It's incomplete. One pathology discipline signs out completely than the others. Some is structured, some is unstructured. The policies change over time. Patients come from all different places. At Mount Sinai, we have the same issues in EHR and ECGs. That's part of healthcare. That's part of reality. That's real-world data. And that chasm between doing machine learning on ImageNet or some other nicely curated toy data sets versus trying to deal with reality is enormous. And so researchers, institutions, and companies who are successful in that space have to be enormously resilient to frustration and have to understand that you have to be in the trenches with the physician night and day. You really have to understand where to apply AI in these very complex systems, that it actually is useful. There are a million things we can do from the machine learning side that could be very, very interesting. But to build something that is actually useful for the physician, helpful for the patient, and maybe even gets reimbursed at the end of the day, that's a hard problem to solve, and that always continues to be a hard problem to solve. And all of that, as you said, Tom, on unstructured data, on chaotic data, you have to sort out too. So the way we solved it is we have actually data science teams who help us to abstract the data, who work with physicians on different levels to bring order to the chaos. In addition, we also do meticulous tracking, provenance tracking of all pieces of data. That's important for the FDA, that you can really prove out that you never trained, for example, on validation or test data. So that's a different order of difficulty if you're a company in that space compared to a research lab. And so that takes a huge effort. But we built a quite large data set. We digitized millions and millions of slides. We organized the pathology reports, 100,000 sequenced patients which are matched to these slides. And that wealth of data allows us to build these high-quality models we use today.
And that must give you a fantastic base to start to prioritize new ideas and new models. And I'm just wondering how you still think of that today, because there's so many competing things. You might have a fantastic data set, but you have to balance that with, is this actually going to help the patient or the physician? How do you think about that as all your engineers come to you with the most brilliant new idea?
So that is very difficult. And again, in a company, you also have to make sure to keep the lights on. So at one point, somebody actually has to somehow value it enough that that it is paid for, right? And very often, for example, there are cases where we technically can build systems that clearly help patients, but the insurers or the pharma companies or whoever are not interested in that because it would reduce their revenue. And that's a very difficult place to be. So in these cases, we then try to do it, of course, in a more academic sense to at least push the science out. So we publish a lot, right, at Paige and, of course, at Mount Sinai to get all that information out. Also, the multiple instance learning models and the code is all public and all published and used a lot these days. So practically what you have to do is we have a very diverse leadership and expert team that comprises of pathologists, computer scientists, engineers, business leadership, regulatory expertise, reimbursement expertise, and all these have to come together to make decisions what's worthwhile to follow up and what's not. And that still often doesn't work, right? Very often you put months and months of work into something that at the end then doesn't work, or the field changed because a trial failed or another one won or the regulatory space changed. So that's why being a startup in healthcare, so really especially if you work for the clinic, is much more challenging than in many other spaces, right? Where you have, I don't know, if you do an app for teenagers, you do some A/B testing and that's great, right? That's not what we can do in healthcare.
Subscriptions. Yeah, it's a bit different to subscription pet food.
Yep.
So obviously there's a lot of heat in the space at the moment from a press point of view and also interest point of view. I think machine learning, the title of machine learning engineer has probably never been so popular in its life. Now, you've been doing this for a little while now. What with all the noise that's happening at the moment, what are you seeing as some of the true accelerants in the industry at the moment, especially for AI, the medical application of AI, and for Paige itself?
So on a macro level, what certainly changed drastically is that it's on everybody's mind, right? It's obviously in public media, in the social media, newspaper, everywhere, right? Many things, of course, were known to the machine learning community and we worked on for many years, but now it's really center stage for everyone. And it means in healthcare, for example, at Mount Sinai, we have 50,000 employees, 8,000 physicians. Everyone wants to do AI, everyone, right? Which of course is fantastic. Again, we talked about 15 years ago where nobody wanted to do anything. Today, everyone wants to do that. And now you have the opposite problem, that you have to handle all that enthusiasm and get it into the right direction so nobody is disappointed. And we also see that with Paige, every hospital wants to go digital and use AI, but there are, of course, many hurdles to be taken, and Paige helps them to do so. And with the partnership with Icahn, for example, we do that at increasing scale and speed for many hospitals. On the flip side, there's, of course, enormous hype and fluff, and especially in healthcare, it's very difficult for physicians or institutions to differentiate the wheat from the chaff very often. And that's also where there is burden on the regulatory side. I do think the FDA has a good framework for AI, and they should also regulate it in that space. They intend to, for example, close a loophole that's in the US that's called lab-developed tests, LDTs, where pathologists could just assert that something works, and that's fine for simple immunohistochemically staining chemistry stains, but certainly not for very complex AI systems where I think there is a need for regulation. You have to prove out that it is safe, it is effective, and is equitable, and if a company can't do that, then it shouldn't be used for patients. And there's that enormous gap between, I think, 12,000 healthcare startups. Everybody's doing AI. They're pitching hospitals and physicians constantly. While on the other side, in pathology, if you want to use something that's proven to be safe and effective, you have a choice of one, That's just Paige. Even nearly 2 years after the approval, not a single company could follow. And it shows you how difficult it is, although their pathway with the 510K would be much easier than what we had to go through back then. But it's very, very hard to build AI at scale that really works. And as a community, of course, we have to close that gap, right? We have to come up with mechanisms that more AI than just Paige is available. Paige, the platform itself is open. We deploy many other algorithms in research use only or LDT fashion if pathologists choose to do so. But there has to be more regulated and FDA approved AI in that space as well. So that's that interesting dichotomy we work on in healthcare. And that's only different to not regulated spaces where you're just flooded with a million GPT-based applications.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Tom and I had our experiences with the medical world and medical regulation, mostly out of Europe and Australia, but I think you're absolutely spot on. That burden of proof and that barrier to entry, I think, is a lot higher than people see from the outside, and getting over that it's a big task. And I mean, I will say congratulations for getting over that. That's a good outcome. I mean, seeing how this is helping people is such a fantastic thing. But for those in our audience with a background in AI, perhaps non-clinical but keen and ready to try and help the world with artificial intelligence, what do you see as some areas that are perhaps being missed? We saw a big wave in radiology a few years ago and many more today, but are there areas through your work in Paige or your work in Mount Sinai that you think you wish some of those new AI enthusiasts would spend a little more time on?
Good question. So I think pathology is well covered by Paige. Outside of that, so at Mount Sinai, we just founded a center for AI in ophthalmology. That's actually one of the earliest applications of fundus images, for example. But by now, you can do much, much more on non-diluted fundus images. And the goal here is really to add that domain as easy in primary care visits as your blood pressure, for example, or as your height and weight. You just look into the machine without medication first. Fundus image is taken, and based on the vessels, you can actually these days predict all kinds of things, right? Diabetes, sometimes cardiac problems. There are indications you even could predict some of the neurodegenerative diseases. And that new Center for AI in Ophthalmology is planning to work on these tasks. We are planning similar centers for urology, for example, and radiology, of course. And these areas have a long history of being digital to a large degree, and that can be utilized in these areas. Dermatology is, of course, a very common area. But if you go beyond the image-based applications, the breakthrough, of course, in language and will have impact on all of healthcare. So that starts with the primary care visits, where these ambient tools that record the physician and the patient and then transcribe everything, put it in context with the electronic medical record, and then summarize everything and write the medication down that are needed for the patients. These will have a huge impact. If you talk with physicians who use these, they are tremendously excited. I never saw physicians that excited. They can say they don't have to sit in front of the machine, write everything down. They can go home early. Their spouses are happy and so forth. And that's, of course, true also in pathology for sign-out, right? It will also be completely voice-based soon. Similar methods will be used in psychiatry. At the eye department at Mount Sinai, we also are hiring computer scientists for computational psychiatry, for example, together with the Institute for Computational Psychiatry at Mount Sinai, where you can use voice, Zoom, video, and so forth for all kinds of psychiatry-related questions and diagnosis. So there will be nearly no area of healthcare that will not be touched by AI in the coming years, as of course many other areas of our lives. But in healthcare, I think there's also it's not only a need, it's really a demand we have to fulfill, right? That's why all these science fiction doomsday prophecies about existential threat are distracting and could actually hurt the field and patients drastically, right? Medicine is still conducted. We will look back in 10, 20 years and we will think we were in the Middle Ages in 2023 in terms of healthcare. And we have to overcome that. And the only way there is AI, and we have to do whatever we can to push that forward.
Yeah, the other trend that makes me see this as a absolute need is the spinning out of control costs across some of the best healthcare systems in the world. No matter what seems to happen, very, very, very large countries that are pretty good at organizing themselves are unable to keep the costs under control. And I really have a hope that AI can improve this whilst maintaining and drastically improving levels of care in certain areas. Just pulling on that thread a little bit about if someone was, areas that are under might be being missed. If you're for someone in the audience, how do you consider balancing the technical skill of your trade with your technical skill, the clinical skill in this space, and also to some extent your ability to research as well? How do you balance those those three areas which are important for a career in this field?
So if one is really serious about AI in healthcare, it is worthwhile starting your career in one of these academic medical centers that build AI themselves. It's not a coincidence that Paige was spun out of Memorial Sloan Kettering. It's not a coincidence that there's an AI department at Mount Sinai and so forth. And it's also not a coincidence that in the past, actually, the large tech companies failed in healthcare over and over and over again, although they had all the resources in the world in terms of GPU and machine learning experts. And the reason that's the case is you cannot just develop something, throw it over the fence, and hope it's going to work in the hospital. You really have to understand that oiled machinery off a clinic, and to understand where it really can help. And the only way you get experience to that is if you're in the trenches with the physicians. So what I do is when we have a new PhD student, I immediately pair them with a physician. Often when they get more experience, they have multiple ongoing projects and they meet with the physicians constantly. That's also why it's key that AI institutes and departments are in the center of these hospitals and the center of the campus, that there is that constant daily interaction between the disciplines. That's the only way you can crack that code. I don't think there's another route. And when you found more or less kind of product market fit in the terms of science and need in a hospital, then you can go and spin that out, for example, and also try to then build a company around it, which is also a necessary step. A hospital or academic medical center cannot run a company where you need quality management systems, ISO standardization, 24/7 service and security, as Paige does across the globe. You need a proper setup company to do that. But the first phase is you have to be in the trenches. There is no shortcut.
Yeah, got it. Do the work, guys. So, obviously there's, and back to that idea of, there's a lot of noise in the space at the moment. So there's things that are really going to push Paige forward. But what's keeping you up at night at the moment about Paige as you're, as the world wakens up to this idea of machine learning and the benefits it can bring?
I'm of course an impatient person, and I think everything can and should go faster, that's always the case. But in healthcare, that's not always good. and in companies that's not always possible, right? Because if you want to do something, have to do something really proper, things are just slower than in an academic lab where you can run really fast. Right? Actually, as regarding Paige, now after many years of not sleeping, I sleep quite well. I think Paige is very well positioned at the moment, and we see traction in many areas. And we're building these significantly larger models also with partners, which are enormously exciting and will certainly change how pathology is done in the near future. What's of course always difficult is that even though you have a seamless platform, so Paige is nearly zero footprint. As soon as a slide is scanned, it's uploaded. You have workflow management with Paige Full Folio, and then you have a FDA-cleared viewer with Paige Full Focus, and then Paige takes care of all the storage, which is, of course, much cheaper and more efficient than if you do it on-prem. Although you have all of that, converting a hospital to digital, if they want to use AI on top, which is mostly the driver, still takes a lot of time. It's still change management. It's as soon as pathologists use these digital technologies, they are very happy. But before they use it, they are quite often, like humans are, do not want to change. Right? But we had many examples where pathologists were anxious, and then 2 weeks later they said they would never want to go back looking to a keyhole through a microscope again, right? They don't want to search for slides anymore. Everything is at their fingertips. They don't want to look for the needle in the haystack if Paige can just point out where the cancer is, for example. Or it gives them peace of mind. So one of the most loved applications actually is cancer detections in lymph nodes for looking for metastasis, where you look really for very small lesions, just a few cancer cells. And it's a very difficult task. And good pathologists are always anxious that they missed something. And what they said is they run Paige AI on every of these cases, at the negative ones, because it gives them peace of mind that they really didn't miss anything. And as soon as they do it, they are completely in, right? Their life becomes much more pleasant. Their work becomes much more pleasant. AI in general will reduce burnout for physicians, which is very important. We don't have enough. We don't have enough pathologists. We don't have enough physicians. And after the transformation, all is good. But before that, it's still change management. And that of course, always takes a lot of effort. But you see that clear acceleration in pathology, and that it goes quite fast.
Yeah, absolutely. Really interesting. I think for many in the audience who've probably, hopefully, never had to have a prostate biopsy, a lot of the work that I think Paige helps to automate and supercharge probably happens very, very far from the patient. They might see maybe a summary from the urologist of the pathologist report of viewing the slides. How do you think about where Paige sits in terms of, proximity to the patient, and is there anything you can comment on about, educating the patient more and providing them with more than just perhaps a summary of a lot of clinicians' hard work?
Elliot, that's a perfect point. Pathology in general is usually removed from the patients, right? The patients know their urologist, for example, or the oncologist, but usually not the pathologist, which of course is kind of absurd because everything hinges on the diagnosis by the pathologist. You do not have cancer until a pathologist says so. You don't get specific kinds of treatment if a pathologist doesn't say so. And all the pharmaceutical trials are also based on the pathologist assessment. So there is a large second opinion market in pathologists where patients already go to other hospitals to confirm, for example, what kind of Gleason grade or they have in prostate cancer. Do we really have to remove the prostate? Can we do watchful waiting and so forth? So that has huge impact. And what Paige can do here is really help not only the physicians, but also the patients very quickly to be assured what the diagnosis really is. I just had a great conversation about that and gave a talk at the Prostate Cancer Foundation, which is one of the largest patient organization. And there is a lot of interest to get AI much, much closer to the patients so the patients can ask for it. The whole point of naming Paige, actually Paige, was that patients can talk about it. And so I was still in California and was driving from LA to San Diego to a conference, and I thought we have to find a better name than statistical learning and machine learning for these things. And all famous AIs had female names like Alexa and Siri and Cortana and Nell and so forth. And PAGE stands for Pathology Artificial Intelligence Guidance Engine. And my intent was that patients can talk about her, right? They can say, ask their doctor, can I get a PAGE score? What does PAGE say? Did you ask her about the assessment and so forth? And that time will come. We are working towards that. And the more the field gets digital, the more informed patients are, the more they ask about that. You see that in breast cancer, where patients already ask for all kinds of tests, and it will also happen in prostate cancer and other areas. So that is exciting, and it should be more patient-facing. I agree.
You gave a face that slightly alluded to big changes coming or something down the pipeline. What can you tell us what's coming down the pipeline for Paige in the next 12 months? But also, if you look forward 5-10 years, what does Paige look like for you?
So both goes hand in hand. So what's very unique about Paige is that it's really very much focused on the clinical space. So there are many pathology AI companies out there, but if you look closely, they usually do service work for pharma, which is great. It's good business, short-term business, but it's very, very different than having regulated AI running 24/7 across the globe. And that's certainly what Paige is going to build out at larger scale in terms of more models, better models, but also especially in the platform to host more. So Paige is an open platform. We have, for example, MindPeak algorithms on it. Visio Farm is coming, Flagship, and so forth. So it will be a home for algorithms from many, many companies, because that's necessary. Pathology is an enormously broad field, and one company cannot do everything. So that's the first thing. So the platform, if you think in 5 or 10 years, I'm very convinced will be the standard. It will be the standard platform in that space and will be the door to all these fabulous applications. On the AI side, no big surprise. The question is always execution. Build much larger foundation models we can use in broader sense for rare cancers, for genomic applications, and so forth. There are so many cancers that don't get addressed because there's not enough data or not enough interest. I'm completely convinced with proper foundation models we can do that, and Paige is working for quite some time on building these. And that is very exciting. And as you know, we are just at the beginning of the new wave of algorithms in that space. Right? There will be a lot of growth, and we intended to capture that for the pathologists and the patients.
Oh, sounds like big things on the horizon. That's amazing. I think you mentioned bigger algorithms, likely more compute. Taking advantage of these supersized models that we're seeing and backing GPTs and stable diffusions and the likes. But I suppose one thing I've always thought of is about those parts of the world where massive compute just isn't available. There's a lot of parts of the developing world where the idea of putting in a GPU cluster is probably going to get you laughed out of the room. How's Paige thinking about bringing what is such a needed technology to the parts of the world where the infrastructure behind what it takes to run an AI company maybe isn't where it needs to be locally.
Yes, I mean, as you know, the beauty in machine learning is you need that enormous amount of compute when you train these models. After you trained them and distilled them and optimized them, you can run it rather cheaply everywhere on the world. So to that end, AI is truly a means to democratize access to healthcare. So even in the US, if you think of community clinics, not everybody can afford to go to Sloan Kettering or Mount Sinai. And what we showed also in the FDA study is that Paige brings enormous benefit to community pathologists who have a very, very hard job, who are flooded with all kinds of cases from all kinds of cancers. And we could show that Paige can reduce the error rate by 70%. So that's 70. That's significant. Wow. And that's something which was reproduced by now across the globe. Studies again in the UK, where we do also prospective studies with NHS trusts towards NICE approval. Studies in Europe, for example, in Portugal, in Porto, they did a very nice independent study, or studies in the Netherlands, but also in South America, for example, in Brazil, where Oncoclínicas did a study that it highly impacts how they actually diagnose prostate cancer patients. So that really shows you that if you have a model that generalizes and you can use off the shelf without tailoring or calibrating, that is constant for everyone across the world, then you can impact community clinics and so forth. So even in the US, there are not enough pathologists. So there a lot are actually close to retirement age, not enough are going into this discipline. The number of cancer cases goes up, the complexity of cases goes up. So even in the US, just to plug that gap in the coming years, you will need AI. Otherwise, you will not be able to keep the standard of care, even in the US. And if we go beyond that, and that's where, for example, Mount Sinai is very active in global public health, you have, of course, countries, and Mount Sinai works with Nepal, for example, or Guinea in South America, where you have only 1 or 2 or 3 pathologists for a whole country. So there the gap is enormous. And for there, you, of course, also have to find other ways to digitize. One of my PhD students, Andrew Schaumburg, already years ago, worked on 3D printed adapters for microscope where you can mount a cell phone because you have cell phone networks, and then you can actually stream that image into the cloud and then have AI assess it. So that's a beautiful application where a technician can at least help in cases where there is no pathologist available for patients. So I'm truly convinced if we do it in the right way, that AI will reduce costs and open up healthcare for a large part of the global population that didn't have access to these tools before. Of course, we have to be careful how it's done, that the cost is not increased but reduced. But I think for many applications, we are on a good way in doing that. Good track.
It's very I'm very excited for AI as well, and this, as you mentioned, this the kind of like applications that are almost small and boring in comparison, where, like, for example, using it to replace equipment, big expensive equipment that countries can't afford, being able to exactly getting rid of a microscope and using a phone that's already there and using AI to upscale that image or something like that. Like, I think that's going to be some really exciting applications in that space. Mm-hmm. So I'm absolutely amazed with how many hats you wear in your life. So you have your research work, you have Paige. How do you keep abreast of everything? Like, what does your reading look like? What are you following? I'm being selfish here because I want to know what you follow and steal a few ideas. How do you keep abreast of everything?
That's a really good question, and I think you certainly caught me at the wound point. I always think I'm failing at that front drastically. You have a lot of, as you know, opinion leaders who seem to be very organized and designed through. I also have kids, and that adds young kids enormous complexity to everything. So first of all, if you think of Paige and also academia, most of it depends on a good team. You have to build, and that's the true for academia and also for the company. You have to build a team and a culture where you trust each other and where you don't have to micromanage everything, and there's enthusiasm and everybody's pulling on the same rope. That's very difficult. That was even much more difficult if you think in the last 2 years at the collapse of the biotech bubble. Of course, that stressed out everyone, and Paige was very lucky to come out on top of that. But these are the times where you see that culture makes really a difference. So that's the first thing. I can truly lean on so many absolutely excellent people at Paige and at Mount Sinai that I have still enough time to talk to you, which of course is a pleasure for me, and which is really nice. So that's the first thing. The other thing is I truly feel an urgency. We are in a very unique point of time. I'm doing machine learning since nearly 20 years now, right? And the world is changing now. It's changing drastically, and we have to bring that change into healthcare, and we have to do it now, right? There is that absolute urgency, and that helps you also to focus and cut back on a little bit of other interests. But now is the time to change. It's quite rare that a field changes so quickly and so drastically, and I think it's utterly positive. Right, I said I'm impatient. Right, pathology is still conducted on most places the same way since 150 years, literally, from the time Virchow defined it more or less in Berlin. It's done the same way. So it's time for change for the sake of the patients and also for the sake of pathologists, and AI helps us to do that, and that is very exciting, and there is urgency. And the change also in society will be significant. How we teach, how people learn, how people interact and communicate, and that all has to be guided properly. But if done right, I truly think we're gonna get into an age of plenty in terms of AI that helps us in all these areas, and especially healthcare. And that's exciting. So that helps to focus, but it's still quite chaotic.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree. You know, there's so much to be unlocked here. And I suppose, you know, we're coming up to time now. So I suppose giving you a chance to wrap this up with one last question. Speaking of Land of Plenty, how can people listening to this help you?
I think personally, I'm tremendously blessed that of all the people who already are part of that endeavor. And that does not. These are not just the scientists and engineers and business colleagues and everybody, but these are also the patients. We have very often talk to patients organizations, and when they talk about their journey and how they think about the future, how they think AI can help them. Right? A lot of things fall into place, right? We are very often distracted by I don't know, politics and gossip and whatnot. But if you really talk to cancer survivors and cancer patients, then that completely refocuses what we are doing. And that's why I am in the field, and that's also a blessing. You never have to question if what you do makes sense or is meaningful.
No, it's fantastic what you and the team at Paige are doing, and very excited to watch what you release over the next couple of years. I have a suspicion you are only just getting started as well, so it's very exciting to see. But we'll leave it there. Thomas, any other final words for the audience? Anything you'd like to add?
I say that often, but it's true. In healthcare, people are dying not because of AI, but because of the lack of AI, and that's what we have to change.
Oh, I like that. Well, thank you so much. Well, we really appreciate your time here, Thomas. Everything will be in the show notes, so we'll link to all of the things we've discussed here today. But until next time, thank you very much, everyone, for listening.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Elliot.
Thanks for listening to another episode. If you're liking this content, make sure you subscribe and like so we keep on going. And if you have any questions, make sure you hit us up on Twitter, join our Discord, or leave them in the comments below. Thanks again.